Let's analyze the model one more time and see for what objects we'll do retopology. The bird is such a simple object that z-remesher would be enough for us. Or we can use a box for hair for it. We'll simply do the retopology because we don't need to create complicated unwraps and riggings. It would be easier to remake the mouth in Cinema using splines. For eyes, we'll use spheres too. And concerning the eyelids, in this case, I like the z-remesher result. We can leave them as they are. The socks and shoelaces already look great, and it would be rather easy to unwrap them. Z-remesher has created a quite good topology for the shoes, but I want to remake it manually anyway, to add some details from the reference. And to make the wheels and supports, it would be better to use geometrical primitives and polygonal modeling. The majority of retopologizing work will be conducted on the body. I want the main polygon loops to be situated along the arms and to describe their cylindrical shape. The arms topology will smoothly merge into the body like this. I also want to separate the pelvis and legs using belt loops. Legs will have cylindrical topology too. We also have to make a smooth junction with the hands and create the hands topology and smooth junction for the head and the body. Thus, in this way, the loops will be situated around the head. Also, we'll make retopology for ears and nose and make smooth junction with the head. Let's select all the objects for retopologizing. I select the body, head, ears, nose, and boots, and drag them to the upper part of the list. After that, I use merge down to merge them into one object. I switch to solo mode to check everything. I should also add the boots. I'll export this object to the 3D coat. But before exporting, let's check the mesh density. 3D coat doesn't work that well with high number of polygons. We can reduce the number of polygons using z-remesher. Z-remesher damages the shape too much. For such cases, there's one more way to make a retopology in ZBrush. Open the Z plugin and select Decimation Master and click Pre-Process Current. ZBrush will take some time for calculation. In this part of the screen, you could have noticed the number of points in the selected subtool. There are 300,000 of them right now. Let's go back to the Decimation Master. Set approximately 20%. And click Decimate Current. As you can see, the number of points is reduced by 80%, and the mesh looks horrible. But it doesn't matter, because if I turn off the mesh display, we'll see that the shape didn't change much. That is the shape that we need for retopologizing. You can check everything one more time, and if the shape changed too much somewhere, you can cancel the changes and increase the value of the percentage slider. In my case, everything looks good. That's why I can export this subtool. Make sure that the scale is set to 100 in the Export tab. And now click Export. I'll save it in the OBJ format and call it Body Decimated. Now let's start 3D Coat. You'll see this menu. Don't close it. Select Perform Retopology. Here you'll see 4 options. We need the first option. We need to import and unwrap the reference mesh with a small number of polygons. After that, select the file you have exported from ZBrush and click Open. If you did everything right, your object will be loaded. In this course, I won't be telling you about all functions of 3D Coat. But for performing retopology, we don't really need that. 3D Coat is ideal for retopology and unwrapping. Let me tell you a bit about navigation. To rotate the camera, hold down Alt and the left mouse button. To zoom, use Alt and the right mouse button. And to pan, use Alt and the third mouse button. In my opinion, the default camera rotation settings are extremely inconvenient. That is why when beginning my work, I always change them to this mode. Now the camera will always rotate around the point you have clicked on the object's surface. In this area, you can see the retopology tools. Let me show you some of them. Let's select, for example, Points to Polygons. This tool allows you to position points on the object. To do this, you should just click. And if I place the cursor between these 4 points and right-click, I'll create a polygon. Also, I can add more points and create one more polygon. Please note that these polygons are on the object's surface, and in this way you can quickly add new polygons. If you hold down Ctrl and hover over any edge, you can add an edge loop. New points will be on the object's surface too. One more tool is strokes. You simply draw a line, and I can draw a few more lines starting at already existing points and press Enter. This is another way to draw polygons. Also, for instance, there is the brush tool. You can change the radius of this brush either here or by keeping Ctrl pressed. Using this brush, you can move the points right on the object's surface. If you keep the Shift key pressed, you'll be smoothing the mesh. If you want to delete everything you made, select this layer. We'll work only with one layer for now. And click on this icon. It's better not to start retopology process with random areas, but with key areas and create polygon loops around them. For example, in this case, the most obvious thing would be to create polygon loops around the shoulder. To do this, let's use the Strokes tool. This tool features one more interesting function. If you click on the empty screen area and draw a line through the geometry, it will draw a closed line around this geometry element. In this case, this line resembles a circle. And then if you create a second such circle and draw a line intersecting both of these circles and press Enter, you'll get a polygon loop with evenly arranged polygons and edge in the place where you have drawn the line. You can change the number of polygons here. I'll just cancel the changes and press Enter. I think that for such a thick arm, 16 polygons suits better. Let's repeat the same for the elbow and wrist. This tool doesn't work that well on junctions between two objects. That's why I apply it a little above the wrist. And I do the same for the legs. In this case, the leg is way thinner than the arm. That's why I make 12 polygons. The choice of the numbers 12 and 16 isn't accidental. They can both be divided by 4. In this way, my edge loops will be in the center of the frontal leg part. One more edge loop will be on the side, on the external leg side, on the back side, and on the internal leg side. The same concerns the arm. It's simply easier to work with such symmetries and to count the polygons. By the way, concerning the symmetry, right now we work with only one side, and 3D Code like ZBrush has a symmetry mode. Let's turn it on. Open the Symmetry menu and select Symmetry. Alternatively, you can use the S key shortcut. And in this menu, turn on the symmetry by x-axis. Also, 3D Code features several symmetry modes. For now, we'll work only in this mode. It's called Virtual Symmetry. In some way, it's similar to the symmetry modifier in Cinema 4D. Select the tool points to polygons. And let's draft the topology for the pelvis. We already have the polygon loop around the legs, and it would be logical to dwell upon the topology around them. By the way, I forgot to mention that you can move the points using right mouse clicks. To begin with, I'll create 3 polygons from the central edge of the leg to the side edge. And I'll create one more polygon from the central one to the internal polygon. Please note that if you add one more polygon, it will be too long and narrow. That's why here you can start drawing polygon loops in a direction to the center. I add one more point to close this space with the polygon. Also, I'll connect the legs here in this way. Let's repeat the same actions for the back part, symmetrically. So we have the basic pelvis topology. As you can see, this polygon is really big. We can add an edge loop here and here. As you can see, we quickly made a quite complex shape. And it will be easy for us to work with such topology. We can simplify it or make it more complicated. For example, we can add an edge loop in this way. Let's connect the polygon loops on the arms. To do this, find the Select tool. Using this tool, you can select edges, points, and polygons. By default, it works in auto mode. If you want, you can turn on the edge mode. To select a specific edge, you should just click on it. To remove selection, you should keep Ctrl or Command on Mac pressed and click. To select the whole edge loop, simply double-click on it. Let's select this edge and the edge loop we want to connect it with. Next, find the Bridge tool. It functions really well if the edge loops have the same number of polygons. In my case, everything looks really good. Sometimes polygons may connect in the wrong way. You can correct this using the twist parameter. Sometimes it's hard to see the polygons because they drown in the reference geometry. You can fix it using the Z-bias parameter. You can select the tool Points to Polygons and add a few edge loops. Let's connect the wrist and the elbow in the same way. Using the Select tool, I select 2 edge loops and apply Bridge. Let's also make the legs topology in the same way. I simply create a polygon loop in the ankle area. The most important thing is to ensure that the number of polygons is the same as it is upwards. In our case, it's 12 polygons. And now, using the Select tool, I select the edge loops and use the Bridge tool. In the settings, you can increase the number of perpendicular loops. And now we should somehow figure out how the topology of the arms and legs will connect. And also think through the connection with the head. It would be the easiest solution, to start with the places which require fine connection. For example, in this case, we can see that the topology can be drawn from the arm to the hip like this. Besides, since the arms and legs are symmetrical, we can make the chest symmetrical from the topology point of view. Let's make 2 polygon loops in this way. The number of polygons in these loops isn't important for now. I'll make 3, just to ensure that they describe the shape well. Also, it's obvious that some polygons will be directed from the center to the head, approximately like this. There will be a belt loop around the head, and some polygon loops will be directed from the shoulder to the head. Let's start with the pelvis. I'll draw several lines using strokes and direct them towards the head. But at some point, I'll need to curve this topology towards the arm. It means that somewhere here, we'll have a pole. For now, let's proceed with the circle around the pelvis and see whether it looks good. I think that in this case, it would be okay to draw this loop towards the arm. And the next loop will be directed upwards. Let's do the same on the other side, symmetrically. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 loops from the pelvis towards the arm. And the other pelvis loops, there are 4 of them on one side, are directed towards the head. Let's repeat the same actions on the backside, symmetrically. I'll prolong the circle to the end. And here 4 loops will be drawn towards the head. Let's prolong these polygon loops towards the head and see what we'll get. We get 4 long polygons, and as you can see, a pole here. It means that here the pelvis topology turns. Its part continues to the head, and another part continues to the arm. Let's fill in this space with a polygon to form the frontal part of the chest. We can add here an edge loop and connect it with the arm. Let's look at this pole more carefully. As you can see, 5 four-sided figures meet here. It's recommended to avoid creating poles with a higher number of polygons. And actually, it's better to place such stars on flat surfaces. Such poles are always the places where polygon loops intersect. Please note that these polygon loops around the pelvis are parallel relative to one another. And when we cross a pole, the polygon loop starts moving to the arms. It's similar here. This edge loop is intersected by numerous parallel polygon loops around the arm. And when we reach the pole, they change the direction and align around the pelvis. Let's repeat the same actions for the backside. Firstly, I make 4 such long polygons using points to polygons. Later, they will go towards the head. Next, I add edge loop and connect it with the arm. Now let's work on the junction between the head and the shoulder. This time, let's try creating 4 polygons at once in front of the head. I align them a little using brush. And actually, we can make it symmetrical like it is downwards. There are 4 polygons directed from the pelvis to the head, and 4 starting from the arm. So here, 4 of them come from the pelvis and 4 of them come from the arm area. As usual, I create such long temporary polygons to see how they look here. Let's connect them with the rest of polygons around the head. And symmetrically make 8 polygons in the back part. Altogether, we get 8 polygons in the front, 8 in the back, and 8 on each shoulder. Total of 24 polygons around the head. Now we can connect 4 loops with the loop around the head. And now all we have to do is to add edge loops to the shoulder and the chest and connect the rest of the polygons. Let's repeat everything symmetrically for the back. Connect 4 polygon loops with the head, add edge loop and connect all of that with the arm. Now, when the basic layout of the torso is ready, you can use brush to smooth some unevenness. Also, in some places, you can add some edge loops to ensure better detailing. For example, here. Also, you can even the whole mesh by clicking relax several times. But it's better to use this function at the very beginning, because if you created many small details, they can get displaced. In this case, I can fix them manually using brush. I want to expand this place a bit more, because it seems to me that the pole is too strained. I also add one more edge loop. Now let's get to the topology of the hands. Fingers obviously have the cylindrical topology. That's why we use the stroke tool to make the polygon loops for the fingers. This time I'll start with 8 polygons. If you got polygons on the cylinder's ends, you can delete them using the tool Delete Polygons. Just click on the unnecessary polygons. I use the brush tool to better adjust the edges for junctions of fingers with the hand. Now we need to figure out how to connect the fingers topology with the wrist topology. It would go approximately like this. And we also need to make up how to attach the thumb. Most likely, the polygon loops will be directed from the wrist towards the thumb. And also, there will be the polygon loop around the thumb. For convenience, I'll prolong the wrist topology on the external side. As you can remember, there are 16 polygons around the wrist. For convenience, I'll make only the external part, which is 8 polygons. Okay, now we have 6 polygons and 2 more are to be made. Next, the most logical thing would be to connect those polygon loops, which will definitely be connected. In this case, we connect the central edge loop with the central edge loop of the middle finger and create 2 such polygon loops. Also, I instantly connect the wrist with the little finger like this. And since the thumb is situated below the middle part, the index finger will be connected in the same way as the little finger, and the topology will be symmetrical. For my convenience, I add several edge loops so these polygons aren't so long. I add more polygons to prolong the finger topology towards the wrist. I connect them like this to get a polygon loop here. Now I connect these polygons between the fingers. Let's do the same on the other side. I also prolong the wrist polygons. I find the fourth polygon to find the wrist center and connect this polygon with the middle finger. I add edge loop and connect all fingers with the polygon loop. While I'm here, I close the spaces between the fingers. Let's see what we have gotten. Here we have 2 polygon loops. And here we have 3 of them, and we should somehow connect them. Let's add a few more edge loops here. In this situation, the easiest thing to do would be to create such a triangle. I simply connect these 4 points. And now we can connect the polygon loops of fingers and the wrist. Pay attention that this triangle is accurately in the middle between the fingers. Let's do the same on this side. Here the triangle is right in the middle between the fingers. Let's do the same on the other side. I also connect these loops. And please note that now there are 6 polygons around the thumb. If we add an edge loop like this, there will be 8 of them. There is the same number as on the fingers. Let's even and smooth the topology using the brush tool. I add one more edge loop around the wrist to better detail the shape. In general, I like the connection between the fingers and the wrist, and we can simply make the cylindrical topology for the thumb and cover the fingertips. Now the thumb and each of the other fingers have 8 polygons in the belt loops, and it often happens that you may want to increase their number. I'll show you one way how to do it without remaking the whole topology. Now I want to make 10 polygons around the belt loops for each finger. To do this, using the tool Points to Polygons, I can make an edge loop here and here. Now the middle finger has 10 polygons, but the little and index fingers have only 9 polygons. Everything's clear with the index finger, because its topology merges into the topology of the thumb. So we can simply add an edge loop here, and the number of polygons for the index finger will become 10. But the thumb will have 9 polygons. We should somehow add one more polygon loop for the thumb. We can try adding it somehow like this. But such a polygon loop will go around, and in this way, 2 polygon loops will be added. That's why this option isn't suitable for us. And also, we shouldn't forget that we also need to add a polygon to the little finger too. If we do it in this way, the polygon loop will go towards the arm. It isn't suitable either. Actually, there is a way to add this edge loop and redirect it towards the thumb. This option would solve both problems at once. The easiest way is to do it using this polygon loop. I temporarily add an edge loop here. And here, as you can see, these edges intersect on this polygon. Now I delete them. And let's delete this polygon using delete polygon. Now let's add edge loops where we wanted to add them. Here, there's a hexagon space. Let me unfold it. It's really easy to close such spaces. You can simply add a point in the center and create 3 polygons like this. If we look carefully, we can see that this polygon loop starts from the little finger and continues to the thumb. And now each finger has 10 polygons. The only thing to do is to even the mesh. You can move the points manually or using the brush. But it seems to me that it would be more convenient to delete all these long polygons and make new topology using the strokes tool. To delete the polygon, use delete polygons. You can just erase them as if with a brush. The most important thing is to make sure that you haven't deleted anything you actually need. Now, using the brush tool, I'll even the points around the fingers. Sometimes the points drown in the reference geometry and brush can't reach them. In this case, it would be easier to delete them and create them once again. Now I create new cylindrical topology for the fingers using strokes. But this time I want to make them like this and cover the very tip of the finger. Don't forget that now we have 10 polygons. I do the same for all other fingers. Thanks to this shape, it will be easier for us to make the topology for fingertips. And now I delete these unnecessary polygons. Using the select tool, I select the end edges and connect the polygons using bridge. Now, using points to polygons, I add more edge loops. Now, if we add edge loops here and here, we can increase detailing between the fingers and automatically get rid of these triangles. Now they are 4-sided figures. I edit the mesh a little bit more. Let's finish the fingertips. It's quite easy. I use the strokes tool. Firstly, I draw an edge through the symmetry center and two edges like this. I do the same for all other fingers. If you want, you can use brush to smooth the mesh a bit more. You can also use relax. Click on it a few times. But you should be really careful, because it can mess up the ready details. By the way, you can also apply relax only to the selected areas. To do this, you can use the select tool and select only those points you want to impact. Now, if I click relax, you can see that it impacts only the hand. Now I want to exclude, for example, this polygon loop. To remove selection, keep Ctrl or Command pressed, let's make the head topology. For this, we can use strokes too. Let me remind you that there are 24 polygon loops directed from the torso to the head. So let's make 24 here too. Unfortunately, the stroke tool doesn't work with symmetry. So press the S key and temporarily disable the symmetry. Now, using the tool Delete Polygons, delete one half. And after that, enable symmetry. Now, using the Points to Polygons tool, I connect all these polygon loops. I adjust them using the Brush tool. Right away, I add an edge loop to ensure a more accurate description of the junction. Now let's try to connect the neck topology with the nose and ear. We'll make a closed loop around the nose. To start, I draw large polygons and see how they look. In this place, we need these points to be situated close to create acute angles. I think we can even add one more edge. I divide this polygon in two. I think that it's quite logical to direct these two polygon loops towards the nose. I don't think that the third loop should be connected to the nose, because it will be too deformed. That's why I think that here we should redirect the topology to this direction. I mean that these loops will be directed from the nose towards the ear. That's why we can add these polygons right away. Now let's consider the ear. I believe that next two loops will be directed from the neck towards the ear. And these will go upwards. I'll draw them right away. Let's try to encircle the ear with the topology. I add one more polygon starting at the nose. I think it will go above the ear like this. Now there are two polygons coming to the ear from below. That's why I added two above the ear too. Let's prolong this upper loop and close it on the back of the head. I add two more loops here to ensure that the ear topology in the front and back is symmetrical. I level the mesh using brush. Next, I think that we can add one more edge loop here to ensure a more accurate description of the nose shape. In this way, we get 8 polygons around the one side of the nose and 16 in total. Now I'll try to close this topology with a polygon loop around the head. Now I want to level the topology around the ear to make a closed loop. The basic head topology is ready. We have a loop around the nose, a loop around the ear, and a loop around the forehead. And what's on the top of the head isn't that important, because it will be hidden under the hair. Now let's work on the ear. I want to start 2 polygons at the upper polygons and go through the ear edge and finish at 2 polygons underneath. It will be easier to create 1 polygon at first. Next, I'll simply continue such a strip of polygons on the ear edge. The number of polygons doesn't matter here. The most important thing is to describe the ear shape. Now I add the edge in the center. Now we can connect it with 2 polygons above and below. I move this edge closer to the base and connect it with 3 polygons in this way. And I do the same on the other side. Now, using the strokes tool, draw such a circle and connect it with all points. Like this. Using the Delete Polygons tool, delete this central polygon. I also want to add an edge loop to ensure better detailing. Now we need to close this space. Here I'll select the symmetry axis. In this case, I want it to go along this curve. The most important thing is to ensure the equal number of polygons on both sides of this line. Then it would be easy to connect them like this by adding polygons one by one. If you got an uneven number of loops, for example like this, then you will get such a triangle in the very end. And to fix it, you can simply delete this loop using Delete Edge and click on it with Ctrl or Command pressed, or add another edge loop on the other side. For instance, I want to add it to ensure higher detailing. I make exactly the same topology on the other side. First, I make the circle loop. And connect the polygons like this. And when the foundation is ready, you can add as many edge loops as you want to increase detailing. I add one more edge loop at the ear base. Now I want to smooth the ear. To do this, I use the Select tool. I select the points I want to smooth and click Relax. I don't really like how it's smoothed in the downward part. That's why I want to add more edge loops on the neck. And after that, the ear should smooth more evenly. So if you are satisfied with the ear, you can move on to the nose. Here everything is rather obvious. It's a half cylinder, and consequently the topology will be similar to the cylinder topology. In this place, polygons will be situated very close to one another to ensure the acute angle is preserved during smoothing. I add support loops to ensure clear-cut edges here after smoothing. You can close this corner here like this, and 2 polygon loops can go from here. One upwards and one towards the center. Thanks to such topology, we can ensure an acute angle here. Let's connect the central loops and see how we can describe the nostrils. So, for such a small hole, a 5-corner shape should be enough. Let's add a closed polygon loop in the inner part. I add a few more edge loops, and after that, close the topology on the top of the head. Here we can just add the cylindric topology further on. It's really easy to close such spaces in the topology. Firstly, I'll close polygon loop in the center. For now, I add a random number of polygons. We can also close a few parallel loops. And now we should close this space. First of all, I close this corner. Next, I start connecting the polygons. If I lack polygons on the top, I simply add them. Now we can add some edge loops here on the long polygons. Using the Select tool, you can select the whole upper part and click Relax a few times. If necessary, you can fine it with the Brush tool. I've decided to add one more edge loop for the nostrils. I just like hexagons more. The boots will have a quite simple topology. The loops will be aligned around the ankle. From here, they'll go downwards to the heel, and from here to the front. And also, there will be a polygon loop around the whole boot. I use the tool Points to Polygons to create 8 polygons around the ankle. 2 in the front, 2 on each side, and 2 in the back. From here, the topology will go towards the tip. That's why I make 2 long intersections. And here, from the ankle, the polygons will go downwards to the heel. And we get such a half cylinder. I add an edge loop to describe the shape better. And from here, the loops will go towards the tip. To close the tip, make 4 such polygons in the front. In these places, I make such a corner as for a cube. You can add an edge loop in the center right away to make the polygons more even. Make a closed loop on the shoe sole. Thanks to this loop, the shoe sole will be rounded, but at the same time will preserve a sharp edge. And I close this space in this way. We make a similar topology when we worked on the ear. Now let's use the Select tool. I switch to the polygon mode. Select all boot polygons. Next, in the toolbar, on the selected tab, click Subdivide. On the same tab, you can find the Clear Selection button. You can level the topology using the brush, or you can select the polygons again and apply Relax. I prefer adjusting topology manually. I also use the tool Slide Edges, keeping Control or Command pressed. You can move the edge loops. I just want to move them closer to the shoe sole to preserve the sharp edge. We don't need to connect the topology of the leg and the topology of the boots, because the number of polygons is different. I'll simply adjust it a bit more. Altogether, the topology is ready. Now I want to have a closer look at the whole model. Fix some issues. Maybe I'll need to add more edge loops and refine the model's shape. You can use the shortcuts 1, 2, 3, and 4 to switch between the different types of mesh display. It will help you to better adjust the mesh shape. I use the Slide Edges tool to move the edge loops. Here, I want to move them a bit closer to the joint to form a more acute angle here. I also add more edge loops on the joint between the pelvis and the chest. I slightly adjust the new edge loops using brush. I also adjust the junction between the chest and the neck. I don't really like the armpit area. Here I want polygon loops to follow the shape better. I use brush to move them closer to the head. I also add 2 edge loops using Slide Edges. I adjust their position. I also see a problem in the elbow area on the outer elbow side. The polygons are more stretched out than they are on the internal side. It seems that the polygons of this edge loop have shrunk. It happened because I overused Relax. Pay attention that if I click several times, the polygons shrink towards the internal side. In this case, the easiest way to fix this is to delete all the elbow polygons and create them once again. To do this, I use the Delete Polygons tool. I delete polygon loops here and here. Now the elbow polygons are a separate geometry part. To delete it, keep Ctrl or Command pressed and click on it. Now using the Strokes tool, I create 2 polygon loops. As you can remember, they should include 16 polygons each. The elbow topology now looks way more even. Now, using Select tool in the Edge mode, I select 2 marginal edges and use the Bridge tool. And using Points to Polygons, I add edge loops. This time I add more of them like this to ensure that the polygon's shape is more square. And I add an edge loop on the wrist. I also refine the head a little. Here I make a sharper junction. And I want to add more polygon loops on the ear. I use Select and Relax to level the ear topology. Now it seems to me that it's necessary to add one more edge loop. Here I draw the edges apart using Slide Edges. I also use Select and Relax. You could have noticed that when you try to level in this place, the central points do not level. It's because we don't really have any polygons on the right side. Let's copy them from the right side to the left one. To do this, you should enable the symmetry. Open the Mesh menu and click Apply Symmetry to all layers. Now, if we disable symmetry, we'll see that polygons are now on both sides. But the problem is that if we edit one side, the other side won't change respectively. There is another symmetry type in 3D Coat for this. To turn it on, untick this item on the Mesh tab. And now, when you enable symmetry, it will function like before. Now you can adjust the polygons along the central axis. Let's export the finished topology to import them into ZBrush later. To do this, open the tab Mesh Export. I'll call it Body Topo. You can also save the scene in 3D Coat, but I won't close it for now. Firstly, let's check whether this topology imports to ZBrush well. I open the project in ZBrush, and all objects for which I made the retopology are merged into one subtool. This is the old mesh. Before importing the new topology, let's duplicate it. Click Import and import the topology. The old subtool was replaced with a new object. And we can see that the topology was imported successfully. Now let's return to 3D Coat. I want to make this green bodysuit. Please pay attention that now in the topology it's almost ready. All we should do is to delete the unnecessary polygons. To do this, I use the tool Delete Polygons. After that, I adjust the shape using the tools we have already learned. I keep one narrow polygon loop around the legs to ensure that after subdivision, these places smooth evenly. Here, I'll just cut out the bodysuit shape. In these places, there is a gradual transition. To ensure that after smoothing it's still gradual, we make the polygon loop like this. And now we can adjust everything using the brush tool. In this place, I use the tool Slide Edges to better adjust the edge loops to the shape. We can make shorts in ZBrush or Cinema. Now I want to make one more element on the boots. The best tool to make these rainbow elements is 3D Coat. For this, I simply create a polygon loop that follows the rainbow shape. Firstly, I roughly draft 1/2. And make the same number of polygons on the other side. I made 5. I also connected underneath. In this way, it would be easier for me to compare the thickness of the right and left sides. Next, I select all polygons of this element and click Subdivide. After that, I want to adjust the shape a bit more, and it will be easier for me to delete the central edge loop to ensure that I work only with the marginal edge loops. I also move these edge loops closer to the margins to ensure that after smoothing, the acute angle is preserved. And now we can add 2 edge loops to split this detail into 3 polygon loops. During rendering, we'll paint them in different colors. Let's export these clothes items. To do this, open the Mesh tab and click Export. I'll call it Cloth Topo. Now let's return into ZBrush and I duplicate any subtool one more time and import the clothes. Let's see how it looks. Let me remind you that to turn on the display of the reverse side of the polygons, you should open the Display Properties tab and click Double. You can see that the clothes were imported well. Often, instead of making the final retopology in 3D Coat, I make the one I'll edit in the other 3D software. And now I'll show you what you can do in ZBrush. First of all, let's use the shortcut D to enable dynamic subdivision. If the topology is rather low polygonal, the new surface often loses volume and you can restore the volume in the Deformation tab. Here you can find many modifiers. You can experiment with them, but now we need the inflate modifier. It just moves the points perpendicularly to the surface. It's very similar to the inflate brush effect. Let's try to slightly adjust the shape. It's especially useful for making the fingers a little bit thicker. But you should be careful when you use inflate. You see that the mesh around the nose started to deform too much. Also, you can use inflate more accurately, if you mask some polygons. Now, inflate impacts only the hand. Also, thanks to good topology, it will be easy for us to divide the object into different polygroups. Keeping Ctrl or Command pressed, I find the Select Lasso tool and use it to isolate the little finger, for example. If you want to hide the unnecessary polygons, use Ctrl or Command-Shift-Alt. Now I press Ctrl or Command-W to create a new polygroup. If you want, you can repeat the same for other fingers. After that, using the Transpose tool, you can mask a specific polygroup and apply inflate to it. In the nostrils area, we still have hexagon holes, and now I'll show you how to close them. To do this, use the brush called Z-Modeler. The shortcut is BZM. Actually, it's more than a brush. It's almost a fully fledged integrated editor. I won't tell you everything about it. I'll simply show you the main principles of its work on the example of different details. In this case, I want to close these holes with a polygon. We can't select specific edges, polygons, and points when we use Z-Modeler. Please note that we can hover on them and they become highlighted. Let's hover the cursor over an edge. After that, press the spacebar and keep it pressed. You can see the list of tools we can use for edges. If I hover over a polygon and press space, I'll see the other list of tools for working with polygons. And the same concerns the points. Now hover over any edge, press the spacebar, and select the Close tool. Now, if you click on the edge around the hole, you'll close it with a polygon. I don't really like the topology we got. There are triangles here. Let's try to get rid of them. Let's hover the cursor on any edge, and keeping the spacebar pressed, select the Delete tool. Now, if you double-click on these two edges, they will be deleted. We have gotten two triangle polygons. But I want the edge to be horizontal. To do this, keeping the spacebar pressed, find the tool Spin, and click on the edge for a few times to rotate it the way we need. Now I want to extrude this area inside. Let's hover the cursor over the polygon, and with the spacebar pressed, find the tool Extrude. By default, target is set for single poly. It means that extrude will apply only to one polygon. This function works similarly to such functions in other 3D software. In ZBrush, we can't select polygons, but instead we have polygroups. A group for these two polygons was created automatically. So press the spacebar again, and in the target menu, select Polygroup Island. And now extrude will apply to the whole polygroup. You can experiment with Z-Modeler here. For example, if you want to add an edge loop, hover over any edge and with the spacebar pressed, select the Insert tool. Now, if you click on any edge, you'll add an edge loop. Let's see how it looks when smoothed. Now I can use the Move tool to improve the nostril shape. Let's move the boots into a separate subtool. To do this, I isolate them and click Split Hidden. Now we have different subtools. I color the body blue for better visibility. Now let's have a look at the clothes. I separate these elements right away. I use Split Hidden for this too. Here I want to add some thickness to the bodysuit. To do this, I use Z-Modeler, the Extrude tool, but this time I set target to all polygons. Now if you pull any polygon, you'll extrude the whole mesh at once. Now I do it rather for illustration purposes and to demonstrate the functions of ZBrush. It will be easier to add this thickness later in Cinema 4D in the procedural way. Besides, it's way easier to make the UV mapping if the clothes has no thickness. But now it will be more convenient for us to use the Move tool to adjust the shape of this bodysuit. Let's finish the boots. Now I want to work on these rainbow elements. I want these 3 lawn polygon loops to be 3 separate objects. And to begin with, I use ZModeler to make different polygroups. Hover over any polygon and with the spacebar pressed, select the Polygroup tool. The target is by default set to single poly. If you click on any polygon, its polygroup will change. If you change the target settings to polyloop, the polygon group will change for the whole polygon loop. Please note that if you hover the cursor over the polygon, a yellow line appears from the center. In this way, you can change the direction of the polygon loop. If I select the second loop, it will have the same polygroup. And to change it, you should press the left mouse button and keep it pressed. Next, you should press the Alt key a few times. Instead of Extrude, it would be easier to use one more tool, which can be found in the tab Geometry Edge Loop, and it's called Panel Loops. Let's click this button and see what will happen. As you can see, it executes several actions at once. It extrudes, makes bevels on the edges, and even smooths these polygon loops. Now let's have a look at its settings. Cancel the changes and let's reduce polish. Now if I click Panel Loops, polygon loops won't be smoothed before the extrusion. If I eliminate bevel, the bevels are removed. Now I want to reduce the number of edge loops here. You can use the loops parameter for this. Let's turn on dynamic subdivision to see how this all looks. I cancel the changes once again because I want to decrease the thickness. This is almost what we need. With dynamic subdivision, we see such openings. To fix it, I'll add one loop around the edge and slightly increase the thickness. I want to make these white elements on the tips. And our topology is already perfectly adjusted for making such elements. Let's isolate some polygons. Now I press Ctrl or Command W to create a new polygroup. And then on the Geometry tab, I click Split Hidden. Now it's a separate subtool. I'll use ZRemodeler again. Hover over any edge, and with the spacebar pressed, select the Extrude tool. And in the target menu, select Edge Loop. Now, if you pull the margin edge, you'll extrude the polygon loop. The most important thing is to control that these corners don't merge into one point. Now, let's turn on dynamic subdivision and see how it all looks. Now, this margin is too smoothed. That's why I add a support loop. I use Insert for this. And I do the same on the other side. Firstly, I use the Extrude tool and add support loop with Insert. If you want, you can repeat the same here. Now, change the color of these objects for better visibility, and after that, merge them into one subtool. Now it will be easy to adjust the shape using Move. I also want to slightly improve the shoelaces to make space for one more white element on the top. I'll use the ready topology for it. I want to cut out this place. To do this, I duplicate the subtool and delete the unnecessary polygons. For this, I'll use ZModeler too, in the delete mode, and set target to polygroup island. In this way, I simply delete the polygroup. Now I switch target mode to polyloop mode and delete these loops. And delete the other pieces in the island mode. You should get such a piece. I also want to delete some edges to slightly simplify the topology. Next, I'll just adjust its shape using the transpose tool. I want to add some thickness. To do this, I use ZModeler in the extrude mode. And I set target to all polygons. Let's see how it looks in dynamic subdivision. Now the corners are quite smoothed. That's why I add one more edge loop. Adjust them using slide and move. The upper part of the boot is ready, and now we should add the supports and wheels. They're almost completely made up of geometrical primitives. It will be easier to work on them in Cinema. But since we made almost everything in ZBrush, let's make them in ZBrush too. At the same time, we'll improve our skills in ZModeler. Now the wheel's topology is excessive and it will be inconvenient to work with it. The easiest thing is to create them from a new primitive. Let's create a new tool, Cylinder 3D. Open the initialize settings and click Align X. I reduce V-divide to minimum and set H-divide to 16. Click Make Polymesh 3D to make it editable, and in the tab Geometry Modify Topology, click Mirror and Weld. Enable symmetry using the X shortcut. Now this model is symmetrical. I'll use ZModeler. Here I add an edge loop using Insert. Now I want to extrude this central part. To do this, I use polygroup in the polyloop mode. Now, when I have one polygroup, I can use extrude in the polygroup island mode. Since we now have 3 different polygroups, we can use the transpose tool and with Ctrl or Command pressed, click on one polygroup to mask it. In this way, we can adjust its position. Using ZModeler, you can mask both separate polygroups and separate edge loops. To do this, you can use the mask tool in the mode Edge Loop Complete. Click on this edge loop, invert the mask, and now you can adjust it. Here I use bevel to make the edges sharper. Let's see how the model looks in dynamic subdivision. I add one more edge loop using Insert. Here I use the tool Move Infinite Radius. It enables to move the whole edge loop in the screen plane. If you keep Alt pressed, the edge loop will move perpendicularly to the surface. Here I use extrude one more time and delete the central part with delete. I'm generally satisfied with the shape. I add one more cylinder with 16 polygons using append, and turn it to the cap using the same tools. I won't make it symmetrical because the internal part won't be visible. I simply delete it and adjust its size. Now let's merge these subtools into one object. I disable the symmetry. Also, I rename the subtool to Wheel, so it's easier to find it. Let's go back to the main subtool and using Append add the wheel, and place it where the wheels should be. With Ctrl or Command, I copy the wheel and with Shift pressed, I rotate it by 180 degrees. Next, I find the polygroups on the menu list and click Auto Groups. Since there are different groups, I can now use the Transpose tool. I select this cap and copy it. Now everything besides it is masked. I invert the mask and press Ctrl W to create a unique polygroup for it. Now I can isolate it and single it out into a separate subtool using Split Hidden. I'll use this piece to create the axis for wheels. I simply delete the unnecessary polygons and stretch it out. Next, I merge it with a subtool of wheels using Merge Down. I duplicate it all together to make the rear wheels. You have probably noticed that in dynamic subdivision, the margin edges sort of shrink. In this case, the cylinder is reduced in length. In Cinema 4D, it won't happen, so we can leave it as it is. But if you want, you can do the following. Use Z Modeler in the crease mode, and set target to edge loop complete. Click on the margin edge loops, and after that, they won't be smoothed in a dynamic subdivision mode. The next thing to do is to use Mirror and Weld. I'll make the brakes in the same way. I won't describe my each step because I use the same tools. The topology of the supports looks horrible. That's why it will be easier to make it from scratch. This time, I duplicate the subtool, open the Initialize menu. It's the fastest way to create a primitive cube. I reduce the resolution to 1, so that there is one polygon on each side. I place it approximately at the place where the support should be. Here I use the transparent mode to see the elements through. I add several edge loops using Z Modeler and adjust the shape using masks and transpose. We make everything for subdiv. That's why I check everything in dynamic subdivision. Now everything is too smoothed. I add several support loops in those places where I need pointed corners. Let's see how it looks all together. I want to add one more edge loop in the center to round these places. These polygons on the top won't be visible. Let's delete them to make the unwrapping easier for us. To do this, I use delete in the polygroup island mode. And when everything's ready, I apply mirror and weld. Let's make pants for him. Here they are so tight that we don't even need to make separate geometry. I simply add an edge loop and extrude such a stripe. I also add a support loop under the pants to ensure a clear-cut edge. For a bird retopology, I create such a cube. I simply edit it using smooth and adjust its shape. I also add 2 edge loops. I use one more cube for a beak. And I delete one polygon from it. I add one edge loop in the middle and one more here below. And now you can see that the shape now reminds us of a beak. And to ensure that these polygons aren't too long, I add one more edge loop. To make the lower part, I just copy the upper one and adjust its size. To make the eye, I use a sphere primitive with the settings of 16 per 10 polygons. And to make the pupil, I copy the same sphere, delete unnecessary polygons, and extrude the margin edge to the internal part of the eye. To make the hair retopology, I use the combination of Dynamesh and Z-remesher. I find such a Dynamesh value at which all spheres will merge into one bulk. At the same time, I want to smooth them a little. And after that, I apply Z-remesher. It looks quite good. But after a careful examination of the mesh, I detected such a hole. So I should cancel it and try once again with different values. I check it to detect any problems once again. This time everything's great. To make the headband, I simply duplicate the body geometry and cut out the band from the polygons around the head. I don't think we need the whole band, because it's barely visible under the hair. That's why I also delete the back part too. I slightly even it out using Move, and make it thicker using Extrude. I also add 2 support loops on the edges. And we are finally done with the whole retopology, except the eyes and mouth. We'll finish them in Cinema 4D. In the next lesson, I'll show you how to make UV unwrapping in 3D Coat.